Thank you, Jason, for giving such a detailed step-by-step presentation going through all that, the full life cycle of the things. There's been some good questions in the chat already. What is the size of the building for your library of things?
I can answer that for Green Lens. We have a 1,700 square foot space. We have about a sixth of that is committed to our repair and material recovery section. And probably, I would say half of it is actually tool storage. And then we have a checkout area and some space we use for like community stuff. We were fortunate to get our space working with a neighborhood redevelopment program through the city. That's pretty sizable for an urban tool library.
And another question is in here is wondering, how do you handle tools that are in especially high demand? Do you have waiting lists? Do you use that as an indication to get more of the same thing? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so this is where software is really helpful. I think most of the software options that are out there will give you some information on your inventory and when that inventory is inadequate. One of our biggest things is lawnmowers are always going to go in and go out. There's different strategies to encourage lawnmowers and tools that are of high need to come back quicker. You can have higher fines. Some folks do it that way. I just encourage people to try and get the tool back as soon as possible. Let them know that, yes, they have it for a week, but they can bring it back on our next open shift, and somebody would be very glad to have it. We just try to keep a lot of everything is the best strategy within reason. If we had a rush on power washers or something that goes out a lot, but you do have to cut your losses sometimes and just accept that you can't store enough of everything to keep everybody happy all the time.
I remember when I was doing some research before co-founding the Asheville Tool Library, talking to the tool library for the city of Oakland, which is tied into their public library system. They had 25 weed whackers and something like 16 hedge trimmers, and there was a 2-week waiting list for both of those items. But they couldn't store any more in the size of space that they had, and they had shifted space around to be able to meet that demand.
I think something else that's really useful for tools that continually come back broken or damaged or worn out is putting together an instruction sheet or a checkout process that's specific to that tool. The Northeast Portland Tool Library was having an issue with power washers coming back not functional. So they really dug into the issue. And it turns out when you start using a power washer, you want to plug it in and get the water running through it before you switch on the motor. And if you don't do that, you're going to burn your motor out really fast. And people don't know that. They don't own this thing. They don't read through the manual. It doesn't come up. So really giving people the tools to use the tools and to make sure that they last and that they're being good stewards of those collective resources.
A couple of questions have come in asking from different directions about acquiring tools, specifically that Craftsman donation is amazing. Someone else mentioned a DeWalt donation, but leveraging the buying power or in some cases the nonprofit status of the tool library to get better deals when you're acquiring inventory. So could you talk a little bit more about some strategies for acquiring inventory?
I can't talk about specifically taking that route with any real experience or confidence. The Green Lens Tool Library had a really good, robust inventory coming in, and I've helped to manage that, and I'm working on developing one, but I think there's probably better people out there. Is there anybody else with some input that would like to jump in and maybe answer that question?
It's a little bit of a balance, right? I think that the great thing about the Craftsman donation was that they didn't have a big ask of us. Part of it was that we negotiated that down. And that relationship was through somebody who was on the board of another makerspace nearby. So often these companies want to have some kind of control over your organization, whether that's naming rights or a board seat often. But it really works just to find your network. We're lucky that Stanley Black & Decker is located in Baltimore. They're a sister brand of Craftsman. I know someone who works at Stanley. We have a relationship. When Craftsman approached Stanley, she thought of me, and then I thought of these other tool libraries. It's really just worth keeping an eye out for people in your network who work for companies. Home Depot is another one that directs a lot of donations through their employees. And they often will donate returned items, things that might end up in the waste stream anyway. And so if you don't want to necessarily give them your money, that's another good way to get product for free. Home Depot and Lowe's both do return stock donations. It's just like any other kind of fundraising. You need to know who you know. And don't be afraid to say, no, we won't name it after you, or no, we're not going to put your name on stuff, because that's what we did with Craftsman. And we were able to get them down.
That's a great case study. Yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit more insights into that. Do you have any minimum training requirements for more hazardous or sensitive and or expensive to repair items?
We do not at our library. I know that other libraries do. We have erred kind of on the side of not giving too much training because it can be a concern for liability. There's some very strong opinions on that in the Portland tool lending community specifically. So part of that tool resource that was put together with that online resource that's connected to our navigation system, we're developing some of those resources, putting together some short videos and trying to add some repair resources to that, but disassociating that from the organization itself so that it's more of a general tool that can be accessed by other places, so that liability is not carried by the tool library. Because once someone signs that waiver, you're not necessarily liable for any damages. Obviously, we don't want to put people at unnecessary risk, but if you're telling them how to use it and then they go and misuse it, that's a different story. And I have heard cases of insurance companies just dropping tool libraries completely because of a conversation about what would it cost us to do workshops or do instruction.
It's a follow-up. In lieu of instruction of how to use tools, what roles do you find that tool librarians have in assessing whether or not somebody is choosing the right tool or tools for the job? And bring up an example from City of Berkeley. When I was talking to them, at one point in time, they had somebody that came in and wanted to check out a sledgehammer, and they asked them what they wanted to do with it. And they were like, oh, we've got this 4-inch piece of concrete in our backyard we want to break up. And they're like, all right, we're not going to lend you this sledgehammer because it was not the right tool for the job. It was going to injure them and potentially break the tool before it broke that concrete. So with that as an example, what is your experience as a tool librarian or training tool librarians to be that kind of informational assessors of members as they're checking out their items?
Personally, I try to develop as much of a relationship as I can and make it feel like it's a natural question. I don't want to put anyone in a situation where they feel like I'm about to mansplain to them about how they're supposed to do their project. I'm also not an expert on every tool. I don't think it's reasonable to assume that your volunteers are going to be experts on every tool. I try to help as much as possible, and I recommend that everyone be open to saying, let's look it up together. Let's see what we can figure out. I don't think that this tool is the best tool for this job. Let's see what we can figure out together. For me, in terms of keeping a reliable pool of volunteers, I try to lower the bar as much as possible on expectations. If I say you have to be comfortable confronting people about fines, you have to be comfortable telling people what tool is the right tool, it's really going to limit your pool of volunteers. So just trying to create a community and environment where people are comfortable asking questions and figuring things out together, to me, seems like the best approach.
Wondering if you could touch back on again about the software and if there is open source software available or what it looks like to get a kind of out of the box model.
So I've done a little bit of research, and again, I'm not an expert on this. I work in communications professionally. So for me, the idea of finding a piece of software, exploring its options, and really plugging it in to test it out is not overwhelming. So hopefully you can find community members and partners and volunteers that are open to doing some of that exploration. I think My Turn definitely has some nice features. I know that they do a nice job of letting you test out their software for a while until it becomes financially viable for you, which is nice. I've looked at Lend Engine, and they've got some nice features that include scheduling and integrated payment systems and stuff like that. Again, I don't know if My Turn has or doesn't have that. I'm just not a subject matter expert on that. I would say building your own stack can be complicated. It can be hard to hand off when eventually you do need to transition out. So if you're thinking of doing something like that, definitely talk to the people that have already done that and are actively doing that. find out what's working for them, find out where the pain points are, and yeah, don't be afraid to explore.
That's a great note to wrap up on.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, and if anyone saw anything in this presentation that maybe you would have recommendations for adjusting or expanding on, again, feel free to reach out. That way we can make sure, in the spirit of collaboration, make sure that we're giving the best resources out as possible.